Okay, we're going to give people a couple of minutes to get settled before we start this session. Let's start to roll, I guess. Let's do this. Hello all, welcome back from lunch. I'm Craig Hayward. I use he, him pronouns, and I'm a digital accessibility consultant at the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill. Welcome to the start of our afternoon sessions with our next session, Alt Text Basics with Sean Tikkun. Now let's introduce our presenter. Dr. Sean Tikkun is an assistant professor at North Carolina Central University in the Visual Impairments Training Program. He holds a PhD in Educational Psychology, MS in Education Media Design and Technology, MS in Special Education, and a BA in Mathematics. Within his profession, he serves the Association for Education and Rehabilitation of the Blind and Visually Impaired, AER-BVI, as a treasurer starting in summer 2024. Illinois AER-BVI awarded him the Distinguished Service Award for his work in training assistive technology professionals for the Academy for Certification of Vision Rehabilitation and Education Professionals, ACVREP, and developing the first automated grading tool for Braille. He is a member of the Board of Trustees for the Governor Moorhead School for the Blind. Yay! His research focuses on cognitive factors for tactile learning and emerging technology applied to visual impairments. A few things before we begin. This session is being recorded and will be shared after the conference. We have professional captioning services and ASL during today's session. You can access the settings and turn these features on and off in the Zoom menu. Please use the Q&A feature to post your questions. You will have the option to post anonymously if you prefer. If you have any issues with Zoom, please let us know in chat. We have someone monitoring who can assist you. You can also email digital_accessibility@unc.edu. Please remember to complete the survey after the session. A link and QR code for the survey will be displayed at the end of each session. And now, without further ado, I present to you Dr. Sean Tikkun.
Thank you very much for that introduction. And also, one of my less academic backgrounds is I'm also a stage performer, if you want to add that into the mix. So for those of you who can see my video, despite the fact that I'm on Zoom, I am very animated. So I wave my hands, it's a thing. And I want to jump right in here. I do use he, him pronouns, and we're going to talk intro to alt text, and I have a lot here. There's so much I love to say about this when I train and work with my students. But I'm going to try and give you kind of a practitioner's and a visual impairments centric crash on this. So if you get the copy of my slides and you see things in there that we have not dealt with, please understand that, working on time here, but wanting to share as much as I can. So with that, to review kind of what was shared a little earlier in the earlier morning session, I don't want to be too redundant with things. But there's a lot of information this morning, right? It doesn't hurt to say alt text exists because, originally exists because some computers couldn't load images. Remember those days? We think of it today as being useful because images carry no information for a screen reader. Again, speaking from my domain specific sort of prejudices and wants. Alt text provides us a text option that screen readers can access and use in place of an image. And on this particular slide, there's an image of the words that say, this is a picture of the words. And if you go to the alt text, it says, this is a picture of the words, open quote. This is a picture of the words, close quote. As a sort of irony to the fact that many people on the web and in many other places take pictures of perfectly useful text and then display them as images. It's one of my personal frustrations. Alt text was originally introduced in 1993 with HTML 1.2. Feel free to give a thumbs up if you were coding websites in 1993. I was there back in the good old days. So again, it was originally there for web browsers that didn't process or render images because of their internet or because of just the capability. And just remember that, an internet without images. From my perspective as a specialist in visual impairments, wow, what a wonderful day that was. My next slide is, oh, I'm not too far, is moving into more discussing what alt text can and cannot do. Again, following on my previous presenter, I generated the image on this slide using a chatbot, like an AI chatbot, to create an image. And if you were to navigate to the alt text for that image, you would have the exact text I used to generate that image. And that exact text was a crowded forest with a stream and a woodpecker. Here we see how good AI is, right? Which is a caveat to the fact that if we use AI descriptions, we're going to get interesting things. Whenever we talk about alt text, we want to communicate what is important about the image. And whenever we're talking about web content, advertising, or elements of that, it's kind of already implied from what's there. When we're talking about it within an educational domain, the job becomes far more complex. This particular image, I ran it past my daughter, who just graduated high school, who wants to be a marine biologist, did an AP class in environmental science, and also happens to be a digital artist. And I just cued her with 3 particular terms. Tell me about this picture as a biologist. And she talked about how the fact that, like, we've got a troubled forest, there's not a lot of growth. There are certain plants that are present. She's not sure what season it is, but we've got some seasonal changes. And there seems to be some abnormal growth patterns. I then had her pause and said, okay, now as an environmental scientist, tell me about this image. She said, well, looking at the river, I'm kind of concerned about the erosion patterns. It looks like there may have been flooding recently. It makes me think that this is in a watershed area or a place that's swampy or prone to flooding. Because of the trees, there's a likelihood of a recent burn event, which could be threatening the strength of the forest or the survival of it. And looking at the trees, she noticed that there may be resonance of climbing vines, which may or may not be invasive to the forest, or may have caused the lack of growth because of the invasive species. I then told her to put on the art cap, and she's like, well, I'm wondering what the subject is. Is it the stream or is it the bird? They're both off kilter. Both could be a subject of it in terms of the composition. The palette choice is very subdued. The artist is trying to communicate maybe a depressing or subdued area without a lot of contrast, without a lot of focus. In terms of the style and medium, we're looking at mixed mediums. That's all from this one image. So you can perceive that whenever we describe alt text for an image, the why is really important. The context of what we are describing is critical, because if a picture is worth 1,000 words, we could easily go on and on and on. And again, the previous presenter talked about, like, the dilemmas of really long alt text that no one ever reads. We want to be targeted, we want to be informative, but as accessibility experts, how do we advise this? How do we generate alt text? So this brings us to the strengths and the weaknesses of alt text. A picture is worth 1,000 words, but what words are we going to choose? The alt text allows us to give a description of visual information, And one of the benefits of vision is that it carries a wealth of meaning and context. But that meaning is purely individualized, right? Whatever we see a picture, we see what our brain associates, what our experiences associates, and all of those elements. It's individualized up until the point that the speaker or the text clarifies it by adding the context of why that image is being shared. In textbooks, educational materials, even on websites occasionally, although often not. I was viewing a few this morning in prep of this. The context should be relevant and should be apparent. The author of the alt text, whoever's writing it, will use their experience and perspective as well in the authoring, which brings us to a dilemma. Is a person providing the alt text viewing it from the same context as the person prepping the content? There's a really high likelihood there's a drink being made over there. There's a really high likelihood that the individual that is preparing the alt text is also not the person who's preparing all of the content, that person will lack knowledge of the contents or expertise of the person presenting or sharing the original content. So we've got some challenges in here. And I already see from Henry a question in there. I'm getting there, Henry. Thank you for asking the question of shouldn't the author of the alt text be the content expert? It's a very good question and one I'm going to directly address. So I appreciate the participation. I can't offer you guys like pay for asking great questions along the way. What I want to do first and foremost is I want to give a bad example. And bad examples are things that we may have to deal with in terms of inaccessible content. And I have shared on the screen a clip from the movie, I think it's Bad Guys. It was like a Pixar film with a bunch of animal bad guys that are saving the day. And in this particular slide, it has the words bad examples on it. It has by Sean Tikkun. But the image that is shared in this particular content is actually the background image of the slide. When you choose something as a background image, you can't add text to it. Frequently, students will get slides and materials where people will use certain background images as a template, may or may not contain content relevance, and then they'll use additional images in the foreground. Be very, very cautious when you're seeing materials that you can tab through everything that's present. When you're engaging it using Google Slides or Drive, you can't tab through a background image. It's just the background. So good, bad example here to get us kicked off on some pitfalls that may happen. If you were editing this, you would have to pull the background image out and then repaste it into the foreground so that you could add the alt text. But we're going to stick with this image for a while. So backgrounds, as I said, are invisible. Sometimes you can layer content, which will hide certain elements visually. When you get copies of these slides, you will notice that there are some elements that aren't visual, but the screen reader will navigate through them. And just remember that any picture that doesn't have alt text attached to it isn't communicating. It's not sharing whatever information. Now, at some level, if that picture is just fluff or 100% redundant, it's not terrible, but that puts us in the very uncomfortable position of judging, is it fluff? Is it redundant? And to whom? And this kind of gets to that content expert element. So some just quick and dirty things. I wanted to make sure you guys had screenshots of where you add alt text. So I have an image here of Google Slides. And in Google Slides, things are pretty direct. From anywhere in a Google slide, if you click on an image and you do Control-Alt-Y, then you'll open that accessibility option and the alt text area You press tab once and you will be in a tab box where you can jot down whatever your alt text is. Boom, and that is all there. You can also navigate to it by doing that right click for a context menu on a particular image. And when you do that, you're going to get an option for alt text in there. Again, it'll show you the hotkey Control-Alt-Y. As a person in the area of visual impairments, I always go hotkeys if I can help it. Likewise, if you were doing it in PowerPoint, as you can tell with my image with circles everywhere, it's a lot more. I have a screen image of it. It's a lot more complex, actually, in PowerPoint. PowerPoint doesn't, by default, unless you have made adjustments to your ribbon, show you the accessibility menu, which means that in order to get accessibility open and in order to generate alt text, you would need to go to the review menu with an Alt-R, go to check accessibility, which is that first icon there with an A1, and is where default goes to. And then it will do a drop-down menu, which then you use the letter L to pop alt text. That's right, 3 keystrokes to get in there, which will open an accessibility pane on that right-hand side. It will automatically put your cursor in there and you can type out your alt text. PowerPoint also has an option for giving you auto-generated alt text. Once you have done this, your ribbon menu at the top will actually show you the accessibility option that will appear as long as that right pane has something active in it. So while it's active, you do Alt JB and then you type AT for alt text and it'll pop you in there. If at any time you close that ribbon though, and you don't have an accessibility option open in a ribbon, that accessibility menu at the top of the page goes away. Well, isn't that helpful? You can go into the ribbon and make it permanent all the time. And if you're an accessibility specialist, I really encourage you, alter your PowerPoint application so that accessibility is always there. It's something you're just going to need, and it has unique tools. Again, you can do this through the context menu by just clicking on the image. On a laptop, doing a 2-finger tap or a right tap on a mouse, and open the context menu, and then alt text is A for alt, and that'll get you in there so you can be putting that information in. Now, I say all of this to share a quick screenshot of Adobe, and I want to offer some recommendations here and some cautions. When you generate alt text within Google Drive and you export it to a PDF, those images generally lose all of their alt text. If you take Google Drive slides and bring them in as a PowerPoint, sometimes they'll lose their alt text. If you bring PowerPoint slides into Adobe, most of the time, the alt text is preserved and stays there. So you can imagine how there are some workflows that will exist here. But to get to the alt text area of Adobe Acrobat Pro, you use the All Tools area, and then you choose Prepare for Accessibility, and that'll give you an option with Add Alt Text. The newest version is not nearly as good as a couple versions ago. I'll be honest, I'm not really pleased with it. And I prefer to add all of my alt text in PowerPoint and export it over personally. So this is a slight change of speed from the earlier approach that we were talking a lot about web accessibility, which is where alt text really began. Within an educational domain, we have 2 big issues with alt text. One, if you've paid attention to the Title II issues coming up with the Department of Justice, we need all of our websites to be accessible and meet an accessibility standard. The second one is our educational content shared within those web formats, which might very well be a Google Slides, right? Or PowerPoint files that are loaded, need to have these accessibility features and alt text generated for them. So we've kind of got a two-phase approach and need already. And I see a question, the generate for me button in PowerPoint, you need to push it. It won't necessarily auto generate, or if it does, I'm not aware of it. Someone else is also typing an answer. So if there is an auto do it all the time button, I'm not aware of it. And I like that personally because, well, I'm about to talk about that. So I want to just share some of the areas in which we might have to generate alt text and some places where alt text is a real challenge. In social studies and history, maps are a really big challenge. Charts and graphs that tend to be descriptive in nature of resources, trends over time, populations, things like that. Those charts and graphs are communicating what is basically numerical tabular data in an inaccessible format. So you can kind of guess where my leanings are, but you can't put a table in alt text. So that doesn't help us. Complex maps or layered maps, maps with arrows for trade, migration, military movements, really give us an added dilemma of how much of the map do we have to describe in underlying content, or are we just talking about the movements in there because there's a lot being communicated. So I just kind of throw those out as examples and why we need experts. Within STEM subject areas, figures with spatial meaning with relative and measurable distances are really a big challenge. Figures that have arrows or labels, and any graphs of data or functions, again, are communicating what is large amounts of numerical information in a easy to digest visual method that we're creating alt text for something that exists because digesting the text is too much. So a bit of a dilemma there. All right, I've got some example slides in here, and I'm not going to go through them all, although I'm looking at the time a little bit here. We'll get to the expert thing at the end of these, and you'll see a little bit why. So I have a sample of a statistics graph. It is a skewed normal distribution here with a regular normal distribution. This slide is taken from a Wolfram Alpha sample. It's a great place for doing math on the web. And in this particular slide, what we are communicating is a lot of the information about at what point along the sample we're at a certain numerical value in terms of the distribution. I choose this graph specifically because it doesn't have dates or specific headings. It has bars that are going from like 0 to 0.2. But that information isn't in the image. We can see it and infer it visually. This is one of those issues where the subject matter expert is going to be critical to how you communicate the data and what other information the student may have access to support their understanding of this graphic. The next example I give is actually of the exterior angles of a pentagon. Yes, my domain, I'm a statistician by mathematical training, but I was a high school geometry teacher for about 10 years. So I have a soft spot for geometry. And in this image, we have a pentagon with a series of external angles with measurements 35 degrees, 50 degrees, 20 degrees, 125 degrees, and X. And so the students, sorry, I had to move y'all's images to see that. So in that case, it's probably important that everything is in sequence. That may be important in communications. We need to know what kind of other materials the student may be getting access to, because the shape and the measurements are both critical to each other. And without those two things together, the student may accidentally infer that the 20 and 30 are next to each other when they're organizing the numbers in order of magnitude, right, for the angles. So geometry and geometric shapes tend to be a bit of a challenge. Even more fun, I have a picture of the D-Day invasion here on the screen from history. Little recent event, right? We just celebrated the D-Day, I think it was, I forget how many years, it was like 60 or I think I can't remember. But as you look at this map, historical invasion maps, it contains the different regiments from the different countries, the arrows into the different beaches and the different locations where they're arriving, which has geographical importance in terms of their distances to cities, the availability of roads, the presence of rivers. All of this information requires kind of an expert's view of it to make sure that the student is getting the critical information. And I may have an additional layer of knowledge in that I play strategy war games as a hobby. And so when I look at this map, I see something very different from a historian that's more interested in politics or sociological factors. I'm looking at the tactical elements of it, which may not be what the teacher wants people to focus on. So there, my background may go down a rabbit hole the teacher doesn't want. Finally, I have, and I'm trying to hit on current events here. I have a map of Ukraine and all of the mineral and metallogenic resources of the country of Ukraine. This is of some current events interest or geography in general. And in this case, we have the map of the country overlaid with certain regions or provinces. And then on top of those provinces, we have cities. And then on top of those cities and areas, we have certain arrows or regions that are shaded differently to relate to different resources that are in those areas. So we really have almost like a 4-tiered map that we have to share information of. I bring this particular element up of a 4-tiered map because these are going to become much more common. As students in classes use more and more geological information system, the layering of information is going to become far more common. To give you a recreational example of it, Pokemon Go is a map of the United States with a layer of the Pokestops or points of interest, and then another layer of random Pokemon that you are walking around in. Making that particular map accessible, because it's ever changing, would be an increasing challenge. But have no doubt, teachers may use some of these resources one point or another. So what do we do? Oh no, I had one last example, which was a physics force diagram, which one of my favorite things was adapting a physics curriculum as a teacher of students with visual impairments, in which we have degrees, newtons, arrows, and directional arrows that are all bringing specific information. So as you can imagine with these examples, we need experts. So I'm still getting to that content expert question. It is some of it. So not all content we translate will be stories and pictures, as you saw. Some of them are diagrams that will need to be done. We saw that math and science content is translated very differently related to some things. As well as within these different subjects, there's a specific lexicon that is really important. So there may be specific words we need to use that are relevant to the content area, which means that any of the authored language should at some level be screened or approved by a content expert. Actually, to save time, I'm not going to go through the linked website on this page. But if you want to have a place to practice, I have the North Carolina reports for, I think it's Greensboro schools. I didn't pick anyone out in particular, but it has a whole collection of pie charts and graphs and all kinds of other elements on it that you should feel free to try and use to practice describing graphs. And this is going to become much more common resources out there. All right. So where do we go? How do we divvy this up? Yes, you're absolutely right that the content expert is a critical part of this element. Alt text written by a subject expert, I'm going to call good practice, though. Alt text that's reviewed and edited by a subject expert is also good practice, right? They can write it originally, or they can get some copy to them and then proof it, whether that's originally AI or an accessibility expert. Not really necessarily. Well, there's one major difference we'll talk about. I would consider best practice in alt text to be collaborative. And I come to this philosophy from the educational domain through IDEA and a collaborative model. I think it's really possible in universities, though, if staff have the availability and the time to work together. When you work collaboratively, it allows the subject expert and the access expert to combine skills and knowledge. And that's really important because although the professor may have gotten an accommodation letter, they may not be able to make sense of all of it. The access specialist has their experiential knowledge to support them in maybe stopping people from going down certain rabbit holes, favoring certain approaches, things of that nature. That person has a certain understanding of the individual needs. And if they've been working with the student for 2, 3, 4, 6 years, they also have some understanding of the individual's preferences, which that individual may express their preferences to the content expert. But if that expert is generating their materials from a universal design philosophy, they may have been generated with alt text without that individual in mind. So we've got this sort of dilemma. We need to establish a practice that also leaves some room for meeting the unique needs and understandings of the individual for whom we may be generating this text. The way a person with a cognitive impairment that may, or a visual processing disorder, may interpret alt text or need support from alt text may be drastically different from an individual with a visual impairment that, say, has no context knowledge of the visual world. Or visual representation. So I know I'm making life a little more difficult, but I do advocate that we need that content expert and that sort of accommodations or access expert to work somewhat collaboratively. Don't discount your knowledge and experience as experts in the area of expert and accessibility and accommodations. The one thing that is critical is that when content is born digital, any changes to the formatting or changes to the alt text can be automated, workflows can be established, and students can actually incorporate the practice into future professional skills. When a student opens a document with alt text in a PowerPoint slide, and they know how to access that alt text, they might go in as they're listening to a lecture and take additional notes on the image. They learn how to manipulate those digital documents firsthand, which the minute they get out of a supported educational environment, those are the skills they're going to need. So the key in all ways is that we get born digital content. Things that start with the digital text and the digital file present as much as possible. Seeing another, and the question that just came in is that how do you create alt text that meets the needs of users with a variety of disabilities? The key, you've always start from what the content expert needs that image to communicate. Then you can look at, is that alt text doing that job for that individual, there's a possibility that will always be present. And I'm sorry to be doom and gloom here, that the alt text and the image both don't do the job, but the lecture or the text that is referencing it already did the job sufficiently well. So we have to always fall back on the content expert and make sure we know what they want communicated through that image. And then kind of look at it through the lens of, is that image and the alt text doing the job for that individual? Because otherwise that person may need some other form of accommodation. They might need, for a common example with the statistics example, they're going to need a braille copy. There's no effective way to have that distribution image communicate everything that's there without a brailled or tactile copy of that image to support it. And so we have to do the best we can, but also recognize where we're not meeting that standard. And I will give you the most common problem that will come in the future Title II challenges is that things like Khan Academy or online learning environments that give supportive images are going to fall under real significant scrutiny in that the images, the video that's being portrayed literally cannot in an adequate fashion be translated into alt text. So I said I would kind of cover the good, the bad, and where the boundaries are here. I'm going to go back and escape out of my presentation here. And I want to go back to my slide here where I described, and I need to reshare this slide. And I want to go back into Google Drive here and just kind of share in my alt text, and I'm going to two-finger click to open the alt text, the image of these cartoon characters that I chose to describe was 5 cartoon characters: wolf, snake, fish, spider, and shark are viewed through the windshield of a black car. The characters are leaning into a hard turn with the car tilted in the frame. They are smirking and looking intently out the windshield. This is version 3 of this alt text. I have shared this image on multiple occasions. When I had my daughter looking at the slides, the artist, of course, she altered the text of this to say, instead of I glare, she chose the word leer instead, and then, or no, smirking instead, and then gave me a very good argument why they are smirking and not glaring, in which case I went and edited it. And she told me that my description didn't communicate that the vehicle was off kilter in motion, implying that this was an action scene of some sort. And so I added that, right? Because why would it be tilted? Anytime we write a form of alt text, be very soft-skinned. As you go through these things, you're going to have to edit, change, adjust. And in this particular case, I was using my 17-year-old daughter as my content expert. I gave it a shot. She changed some words to meet the meaning of what was appropriate. And then everything was, this generation. And that is what will be communicated. I used her as a content expert telling me what should be communicated from this animated frame. Going up, I want to show you guys just by tabbing through on this image. This is the frame slide 5 in it, where I have the image as a background. I'm using tab here and just going back and forth from the title bad examples to the subtext by Sean Tikkun. And you will see there is no other content. It just goes back and forth. So that image is present. If it's communicating something, I, as a content developer, am not choosing to communicate that content very effectively. As an additional example, going back to my slide 2, the image I took of, this is a picture of the words. You can see in the alt text, I have put exactly that in there in an ironic fashion. I did that on purpose. And then in slide 3, with the computer generated content, understand that if people are using computer automated generated video or images, whatever they put into the image generation should come, that should be the alt text, right? And so we really want to encourage individuals that when content is submitted or it is auto-generated, that the caption should be auto-generated image from this source, yada, 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 so that we can put exactly what they had in there. So I offer all of this as sort of a intro to alt text and how to get at it. The best practices of it are really becoming challenging. I do see another question. Is Khan Academy content not ADA compliant? Not under the new Title II. It was compliant under the old standards, but I think it is, and this is my professional opinion, that currently under those new Title II standards, I would not consider it compliant, at least for visual impairments. And whenever you say, is it compliant or not, you need to speak from a disability-centric perspective or an individual user, that barrier-centric perspective, because someone may say it's accessible, to whom with what is part of that compliance. So, but that's off on the side there. I see a couple chats of a lot of zeros. Okay, that was my warning to stop talking. Got it.
No worries. We're good. If anybody has any additional questions, we've got about 3 minutes. If you want to put one up there, maybe we can get another one answered. If not, you have the presentation.
I wanted to marry the, like, a little bit of a how-to to some of the existing dilemmas in there. This is an art, not a science. If it were a science, AI would have us covered. But very famously, oh, did we get another chat? I was just looking. Very famously, one of my colleagues at a conference said, image of a blind woman with her child on her lap, sitting in a forest. Every image that came back, the woman was over the age of 70 and looked very sad and decrepit. And mind you, my friend that put this into AI is in her mid-30s with 4 children, a vibrant, energetic woman who is blind. And she was a little offended by what AI thought of blind people. Any more workflow suggestions? Yeah, good question about the workflow suggestions. The workflow, it depends on how the content comes to us. So my first suggestion on a workflow is if something comes to us without any form of alt text, I would encourage you to send it back and notify the instructor that this doesn't have any alt text. I need you to tell me what these images are for. What are they doing? Then when that comes to you, it may be mostly done. Then you would go back, refine the language, make sure that it's clean. Funny thing about experts, they can be a little egg-headed on stuff. And then encourage you to send that back to the instructor saying, I've edited and added in this alt text. If it meets your standards, keep it, use it. If you have any additional comments or changes you would like to it, please send it back to me. This helps us refine our practice. But that back and forth once or twice is, I think, a good idea, especially when you're dealing with an instructor who is just learning. They have to deal with it, right? Would you agree that universal design should be broader than just visual disabilities, also learning styles? By definition, universal design, thank you, Henry, for that question, is much broader than visual impairments. Obviously, this is my perspective. I encourage people to use the reference Bergstahler, Burgstahler 2001 article. which is an excellent article on universal design for learning, which covers the original principles of universal design and their translation to learning and universal design. And so what I was just teaching some of my students last night is when you run into an accessibility issue or you run into something with a need, go back to that 7-point list from Burkstaller 2001 and specifically target. I think I may even have this slide open still. Let me see here. I can.
We're gonna have to wrap soon, Sean. So we're about down to the end.
Yeah, I just wanted to make sure I got someone to ask for that spelling.
No worries. Yeah.
So I've got it. I just happen to have had that open.
Cool.
So I will share that on the screen real quick, just for reference.
Thank you. Thank you.
Find my share. There we go.
There you go, Burkstaller.
Yeah. And I would just encourage when something's there in a universal design format, point to one of these principles and say, this one's the problem, and here's why. And there you're leaning on research. You're leaning on published theory and research, which everyone doesn't expect from accessibility experts.
That's a wonderful talk, Sean. We thank you for your time. We thank you for this presentation. It's great. It's very informative. I mean, even for somebody like me who's been doing this a little while, it's always good to hear from other folks, technique, talent, and just get back to the basics. So thank you very much. We appreciate it. Next session up is going to be at the top of the next hour. So thank you.